Okay, today's topic is naturopathy, naturopathy, the other medicine. I was asked how I got to that point. Um, and what I decided to do was break that into two conversations. One leading up to naturopathy and one about my experiences with it. And the reason for that is none of my stories are simple. So I would leave too much out if I just said, boom, here it is. Um, so when I was 10, which is that picture back there, um, I was already the size of a 17-year-old. So I made a decision in my own head that I was big and fat. Yeah, I had other people telling me that, but what I understand now is that really I took that decision to my own heart and I adopted it as my own. So I said I was fat, and really at that point it didn't really matter what anybody else said. Um, a lot of times people would say positive things to me, but I simply refused to hear it. As a result, I went on this trek, this legacy, this adventure to try and minimize my gains or even reverse them. Um, Looked at from the other side, had I simply accepted that I was just bigger than everybody else, but I wasn't any bigger than anybody else my size, probably would have been a very different story. Um, but for years I exercised, I dieted, um, I did a lot of research into the physiology of the body, trying to figure out what made it tick and therefore what made mine tick. Uh, wasn't able to come up with acceptable answers, and by acceptable I mean they worked for me. It's one thing to learn a piece of information, it's another thing entirely to implement that information and find that it simply doesn't work. Um, so from 10 to 18, I spent a lot of time trying to fast, which my parents wouldn't necessarily allow me to do if they caught me. Exercising a lot, riding bike, hiking, walking, working with my doctor, and I met the medical doctor that I've had for 20 years when I was 10. So I guess 25 years really. Um, so we've been working together. He was never extremely encouraging. He always encouraged me to zip my mouth and move more, which I was doing, but there's a very interesting thing that happens in the real world. You can say one thing and you can do something else, and people will always go with the action. So because they saw that I was big, they assumed many things that were not true about me. Um, Lack of control being the foremost item. Um, that became very, very frustrating, but I couldn't blame them. Where I lived, that's my head. They must be right. So I continued to reduce my intake and increase my output to no avail. Um, when I was 26, I started taking testosterone therapy to increase my muscle mass. And when I was 35, I was encouraged by this doctor to increase my doses of testosterone. Within 2 weeks, I began to have heart palpitations and my blood pressure went up, my calcium levels dropped, and he began to treat me for calcium depletion. Uh, but I wasn't satisfied with that because my blood pressure had always been sterling. It had always been exactly perfect and exactly the same. So for it to shoot up 20 points in 2 weeks made me wonder what was going on and what he wasn't analyzing, finding. Um, what I wasn't noticing at that point was that my weight was increasing, and I wasn't noticing that because my clothes weren't fitting any differently. I also didn't notice it because work had me traveling, and I was also dating a woman 350 miles away. So I was gone all the time. Um, my intake wasn't as scheduled as used to be, and my outgoing, of course, I'm sitting a lot in travel and work. So I figured I was gaining a little weight, but in the end of 3 months, I had gained 100 pounds, and that was very, very disconcerting. And I also figured out why. Because as a side effect of the testosterone, it says very clearly on the box, which I had not read. Again, I mean, I read it initially when I started taking it 10 years earlier, but can cause exactly, by the book, all these symptoms that I was feeling. And when I confronted my doctor with that information, his reply was, yeah, that can happen. And I was furious. Um, was furious because it made me feel that there was an ulterior motive. See, this doctor also has a very successful referral practice for bariatric surgery. And he had been on me for bariatric surgery for years. However, I know that I can't go under anesthesia again. I've been under twice, and both times I almost didn't make it out. And as many times as I would tell him this, he refused to hear. So when I finally confronted him and he suggested bariatric surgery one more time, I knew that really he had misdosed me so that I would gain the weight. At that point, I stopped using him. It was the final straw of all straws. And I was at despair. I didn't know what to do. And the woman I was dating at that point really sat me down one day and challenged me, because I would tell her exactly why what I was doing should work, but it wasn't, and I didn't understand why. And I could bring out paperwork, and I could show her blood work, and I could do all sorts of things. And she just looked at me one day and she said, "You think you're so smart that everybody else is stupid." It's kind of hard to challenge her back with that, because I was sitting in a place of pride. I knew that what I was doing was right by all the information I had, and yet it wasn't working, and so I was very frustrated. And she asked me to go to a local homeopathic doctor that she knew. And I had never considered homeopathy before. Um, Homeopathy seemed like something that hippies used, just because they thought it was cool and it was anti-disestablishmentarianism or whatever. And I wasn't looking for that. I was looking for true science and real answers. And I'd just come out of a 6-month program of studying insulin resistance and all the good stuff that I could find on JAMA and all these peer-reviewed journals, and homeopathy is way over there. So, but if you keep doing the same things you're doing and expecting different results, that is the definition of crazy. So I listened, and I went. And he performed a procedure on me that I've later learned was very used in the military on a regular basis for head trauma. It didn't solve my problems, but it did open my mind to other possibilities. And he was in Cleveland, Ohio. And when that lady and I stopped dating, and I started spending my time back in Lexington, where I live, I began to look around for someone equivalent. And that was how I found my current naturopath. And I'm very fortunate to be able to use her services in Lexington, Kentucky. And that is how I found naturopathy. Thank you.